Our next guest knows how to do good while doing good business. He's the founder and chief shoe giver of Tom's, and since 2006 has provided 15 million pairs of shoes to needy children the world over. Since launching Tom's Eyewear in 2011, over 200,000 people have had their sight restored, and every day those numbers are growing. And your morning cup of coffee is the company's next target for giving back. Here to tell us about the latest Tom's projects and why the for-profit charity model is a game changer is Blake Mycoskie. Welcome to Full Frame.
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You bet. There's a lot of questions, but the one I want to ask right off the bat is I was, everything's on YouTube now. So I was watching YouTube the other night.
Oh, no.
And here's Bill Clinton. He's like, Blake, tell me about this shoe deal.
Yeah.
And I want you to tell me about the shoe deal, but I also want you to tell me about what's it like to be sitting across from a president of the United States. You have this idea.
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, it like takes off, and now you're talking to Bill Clinton. I mean, that's got to be kind of an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've had so many out-of-body experiences in the past 8 years since we started Tom's, literally in my apartment here in Venice, California. President Clinton was one of, just stumbled upon the shoes very early on, invited me up to Harlem to his office to have lunch and got to know each other. And it was right about the time he came out with his book, Giving, which was all kind of an idea about, you can actually, businesses can be a force for good, not just charities, and business and philanthropy can be merged, which is exactly what Tom's is all about. So we became fast friends, and it's been an amazing thing to have him as one of our many supporters. But it is, every time, it's kind of a surreal experience.
Well, we'll talk about some more of these, but let's go back to the apartment.
Yeah.
The idea, the name.
Sure.
How did it all come about?
So originally, I had a software company here in LA, and I took a vacation, went down to Argentina, and when I was down there, I met, and saw many children without shoes. And at first I was surprised, and then what was more surprising and even alarming was that I learned that many of these children were not allowed to go to school because they didn't have shoes. So, if you think about a child that's living in poverty, their chance of pulling themselves out of it is really tied to their education. And here they were being denied an education because the uniform required a pair of shoes. And that just didn't seem right to me. And I'm an entrepreneur and started many companies since I was 18, my first company. And so I think of like solving problems through business. Now most people would maybe see kids without shoes, need for shoes, they would think, let's start a charity. But that wasn't even in my psyche, because I'm so focused on starting businesses to solve problems. So I talked to some people in Argentina and said, look, instead of starting a charity and asking for donations, which is at some point is potentially going to run out, what if we start a shoe company, and every time we sell a pair, we'll just give a pair, one for one, really easy. And the interesting thing is the one for one of our model has really become what we're known for. But back then, the only reason we did it that way is that was the easiest way to keep track of it. It really, you'd have a hard time messing that up. Sell a pair and give a pair. So we just started really small. Originally, it was called the Shoes for Tomorrow Project. And that's where the name Tom's comes from. Everyone thinks my name's Tom, and if people ask for Tom, I'll usually answer because it's easier than explaining. But really, it was all geared around this word tomorrow. And then we called them Tomorrow Shoes, but then ultimately Tomorrow's was too long for the tag on the back of the shoe, so Tomorrow's became Tom's, and that's how we got the name.
Let me talk to you about two women in your life, two perfect strangers in your life, but they're two great stories. One is, I want you to tell the airport story, but I want to start with another story, which is you move forward, you're giving out the shoes. And
Sure.
I've heard you tell this story about you have an interpreter, this woman chases after you, she starts crying,
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on, he starts interpreting, but you see a smile. Tell this story because it directly ties to what you were just talking about, shoes and uniforms and going to school.
Yeah, sure, Mike. I mean, so what happened was go from having this idea in Argentina, making a couple hundred pairs with my polo teacher of all people, because he was Argentine, he could talk to the different factories, and bring them back, start selling them, and next thing we know, we sell about 10,000 pairs out of my apartment. Like that summer, 10,000 pairs, it was amazing. But once we hit that number, it was time to go back to Argentina and give away all the shoes. So we go down there, we've made all the shoes, and we start going around to the different villages and clinics and schools, distributing them to kind of the people in greatest need. And so we're doing it, it's great, it's emotional, it's exciting, and we're leaving this one clinic. and I'm carrying a box of some leftover shoes to take to the next clinic. And I'm about to get in the van, and this woman comes up to me, and as you said, she was crying and she was trying to tell me something, and my Spanish isn't very good, so I didn't really know what to do, so I went and got Alejo, the translator, and asked him if he would find out, because there were these 3 boys with her of different ages, but they all had new Toms on. So I knew she wasn't crying because they didn't get shoes, because they got them. So anyway, so when he asked her what was wrong in Spanish, and she started talking, she stopped crying and she started smiling. But I really wasn't prepared for what specifically she was trying to tell me, and that was that these boys were her sons. And for the past year or more, they've been sharing a single pair of shoes. And it wasn't even a pair of shoes that was appropriate for them. It was an old black, like leather Oxford shoe that a businessman would wear, that had been just given to them. And these kids would put these shoes on and kind of shuffle to school, and that was part of the uniform requirement. But what she explained was her oldest son would wear the shoes that kind of fit him the best on Monday. He would come back at night and give the shoes to his brother, and then his brother would go to school in the same pair of shoes on Tuesday, but he couldn't go back because he didn't have the shoes. So they'd been rotating a pair of shoes for a year just for the kids to go to school, and instead of going to school every day, they're going every 3rd day. I mean, it's so mind-blowing. You can't even really understand that type of poverty exists, and that type of rule at a school to not let kids go unless they have the proper uniform. So when she explained that now that all her kids just got shoes for the first time, they all had shoes and they were going to be going to school together every day, she was emotional. And then, of course, when I heard that story for the first time, I got pretty emotional myself.
I mean, you must have been crying.
Oh,
right
I was crying. I mean, everyone was crying, and but it was one of those moments, I think, that kind of the universe says you're doing the right thing. Like, this is impactful.
Well, the universe has spoken to you on more than one occasion, and this is not a linear line. I kind of jumped ahead. Let's take a step back. You're at the airport. You're doing you're doing your ticket, and you look and you see some Toms, and it's on this woman. Tell the story, because that's a fantastic story.
We had sold maybe, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 pairs, mainly in the greater Los Angeles area, largely because there was a great article about our company in the LA Times. And so then I thought, okay, well, if we're really going to start to get traction, you got to go to New York, right? That's the fashion capital. It's where all these stores are. It's where the buyers are. So I go to New York and spend a couple of days, talking to potential and not really getting much traction. And so it's time to come back to LA. And I went to the JFK airport, American Airlines. I'll never forget it. And I literally am going to check in, and I'm not wearing Toms on this particular day. I think I had more running shoes or trainers or something on. And so I'm doing the kiosk to check in, and I look over, and there's a woman standing next to me, probably mid-30s, and she's wearing a red pair of Toms. And the interesting thing about this is we had probably been doing Toms now for about 3 months, and I had never seen a stranger wearing the shoes. Like, I'd seen, obviously, my interns, my parents, friends, even my neighbors. But like now, being 5,000 miles away from Venice, California, and seeing a total stranger was like a really exciting moment. And myself as kind of a marketer, I always want to know what people think. Why did you buy them? Where did you buy them? So I said to her, which is very casually, "Oh, I really like these red shoes that you're wearing. What are they?" And I just kind of want to see how she talked about the brand and what we were doing. And she said, oh wow, yes, they're Toms, they're Tom shoes. And I'm trying to play it cool, so I'm doing the kiosk, checking in, trying not to pay too much attention. And she literally didn't like the fact that I wasn't giving her more attention, and she had more to tell me. So she kind of pulled my shoulder and says, "No, I don't think you understand. This is the most amazing company in the world." She goes, when they sell a pair of shoes, when I bought this pair, they gave a pair to a child in Argentina. And I'm like, oh, wow. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? And then she continues, she goes, and there's this guy. He lives in Los Angeles. I think he lives on a boat. And she starts telling me, and at the time I did live on a boat. And so she starts telling me my life story, with a great detail. And so at that point I was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell her, I have to tell her who I am. And so I'll never forget it. And I learned a great business lesson in this. I said to her, excuse me, I said, "Ma'am, actually, my name's Blake, and I actually started Toms." She kind of looked at me, and it's really quiet for a moment. And then she goes, "Why did you cut your hair?" and everyone always laughs when I tell them that one question. But the interesting thing is I learned a lot from that question, because the reason she knew I cut my hair that summer, I cut it quite short, it was pretty hot, was that she had watched all the videos on YouTube of us giving away the shoes when I had longer hair.
Wow.
And so she paid, so she wasn't just a customer, she was really a supporter. And I remember thinking, like, if she cares that much to watch videos of what we do on YouTube and to tell a stranger at the airport about the mission of Tom's and what we stand for and one for one, how many other people has she told? I mean, surely she told her friends, her family, she's posted it on Facebook or Twitter or one of these things. And so I remember flying back to LA thinking, if she has that much passion, and if that's one woman, then we don't need to focus on marketing and advertising like most companies. We just got to focus on giving and allowing our customers to be part of the giving story, and they'll do the marketing for us. And I think that's why we've sold and given over 15 million shoes now, is because there's a lot of people like that woman in the airport in countries all over the world that are telling our story.
And you've never cut your hair since, I noticed.
Yeah, exactly.
You're doing okay.
I kept that.
Well,
Going.
You don't want to run into that kind of problem again. Let me ask you about the for-profit concept,
Sure.
this model, because you went at it, this is what I'm going to do. And yet, some would probably argue that, okay, there's the two Blakes. There's the compassion Blake, who's all about compassion giving, but then there has to be and you talk as a businessman, the competition Blake.
Absolutely.
And how do you merge the two, and aren't they kind of in conflict in some respects? I mean, because a lot of people don't, they think about the bottom line, they think about shareholders, they think about all these things. Thinking about this, that's nice, but maybe it's a little piece, but you're one for one.
I don't think that our giving is detracting from our bottom line. I actually think it's growing our bottom line, because the thing is that if you look at traditional advertising and marketing that our competitors spend, right? They're hiring celebrities, they're doing billboards, they're doing TV ads, they're spending millions of dollars that you could say takes away from the bottom line, right? But that's why they have the velocity of sales, because they do great marketing, and that marketing convinces people to buy their shoes or their products. So what we do is we focus on giving. And I think that giving, when done properly, authentically, responsibly, and in a way that it can be told, and I think that's one of the real things that is so unique about this time in business, where the internet allows great stories and media to travel so much faster at a much more cost-efficient way for a company like Tom's. So that giving, I think, is as good of a motivator and brand builder as all these millions of dollars that the other companies are spending on marketing. So we don't have to sacrifice profit to do good. So I don't think you really have to separate the compassion part to the competitive business person part. And I'm very proud that we make profit. And from day one, I said, this is the way that I truly believe it's sustainable. Because that kid that needs the shoes to go to school, they don't just need one pair. They need another pair in 4 months, and they need another pair in 4 months after that. And the greatest way to sustain that giving is to continue selling.
Okay, so you're out and you're talking to people, but why aren't more companies, you think, following your lead?
Look, change like this that is so radical takes time. I mean, so you think we started, 7, 8 years ago. We really started growing globally in the last 2 to 3 years. So, our story is just still getting out there on a global level. You're seeing a lot of early stage startup companies around the world either integrating a one-for-one model. There's, I've seen there's, all different books for books, school supplies for school supplies. Like, that's starting to happen, and it's typically happening more in the early stage startup entrepreneurial realm. But then what's interesting is you're starting to see just in large companies, Procter & Gamble is a great example, but change like this is decades, it's not years.
Can businesses do it better than charities?
I think that's a good question too, and I think that it's not an either-or thing. I think that charities are a very important part of society and progress and change. Businesses aren't going to solve all the issues or have the diligence and the patience that charities sometimes have. And look, even in our model, we depend on charities and nonprofits for the distribution of our shoes. Our boots on the ground are some of the greatest charities in the world because they're already there helping with malaria, vaccinations, food programs, water programs. So it would be very hard if we had to build a distribution network in hundreds of countries. We definitely wouldn't be a for-profit anymore.
There are some who say, oh, that's fantastic. These kids now have shoes, and now they have glasses, and now they can walk around and see how bad their life is. and how does this really attack the real problems? Were you surprised at that? And does it make you mad that somebody's taking pot shots at you for doing something?
You know, the main criticism we've had over the last 8 years is really, and I think it's a fair one, is that, you know, if you're really serious about poverty alleviation, you need to focus on education and jobs. Because if people aren't educated and people don't have jobs, it doesn't matter how much free stuff you give them, they're not going to be able to have a better life. And that's a very good argument. Now, I think that there is a little bit of a flaw in that argument, in that if you don't provide someone's basic needs, they can't be healthy to go to school and have a job. So people need clean water. People need, you know, to have a food supply that is healthy and works. They need things like shoes to protect their feet from getting diseases like hookworm, podoconiosis, etc. So I used to, in my initial kind of a couple years ago, I used to respond to the critics like almost like with a fight. Like, you know, you understand, without these basic needs, they're not going to be able to do these things. And then I recognized that, you know, maybe by embracing some of the criticism and thinking about, okay, our company's getting quite big now. We're very global. We have big supply chains. Maybe we can actually use our supply chain to create jobs in addition to doing the aid. And it could still be good business for us. And so what we started to look at was, if we address the top criticism, and that is jobs and job creation, you know, could we even have a broader group of fans and customers, et cetera, and what's the value of that to us long term? And so over the last 3 years, we've been working very diligently in this, and we've started manufacturing in India, we started manufacturing in Kenya, and we also now have the only footwear manufacturing plant in Haiti. And the thing about that is now we're able to not only provide aid in these areas that is very much needed, but we're also creating jobs in these communities as well. And we have a commitment by the end of 2015, 1/3 of all of our giving shoes around the world will be made in the countries we give them in. So that's an interesting kind of, I think, kind of part of our story that a lot of people don't know, is that what started just as kind of an aid model is actually evolving quite a bit to where a big part of our impact is actually in the job creation as much as the aid.
Blake, it's been a delight. Thanks so much
Mike,
for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Don't cut that hair. Next, this week's close-up on a mom who set out to empower her autistic son, and in the process created a grassroots organization that is transforming lives.
In a business world of information overload, we strip away the complexity